It's all yours, Doa.
University's Data Science and Analytics Cluster. I will be moderating this last session of our day here of our 2022 Analytics Summit. So you have seen very interesting track 2 sessions on data analytics used across various thematic silos, from addressing the opioid crisis to AI visualization for government decision making, to optimizing bots for improving metrics and bottom line, and a geographic case study of Panama big data ecosystem design and delivery. I am now pleased to present a session focused on a real life human story that has societal and humanitarian dimensions, as well as political and even geopolitical underpinnings, which is a story of integration with a strategy to combat xenophobia against Venezuelan migrants in Colombia. I think many of you have seen the heart-wrenching consequences on the Venezuelan population of the toxic mix of economic meltdown due to poor political governance made worse by geopolitical struggles, with many Venezuelans pushed to exile in order to search for better livelihoods, including across the border into neighboring Colombia. Our most respected speaker, Isabel González of Buho Media, will take it from here. She is a political scientist specializing in public opinion and political marketing, with great skills in strategic communications for public advocacy impact, using storytelling with data to position brand messaging tactically and strategically. So this is about data harnessed toward creating narratives that can impact public opinion. And her work on this earned Buho the 2021 Bronze Award for AMEC, the International Association for the Measurement and Evaluation of Communication. So with our congratulations to Isabel and Buho, we want to hear about how this was achieved in terms of the outcome of the strategy in support of the Colombian government's effort to mitigate the initial negative views that Colombians had of the Venezuelan migrants. With no further delay, I give the floor to you, Isabel.
Thank you, Dohan, and I'm so sorry for the delay. I had a confusion with the time in my country. I thought it was an hour late and not earlier, but I'm here now. So I hope that we can do this the faster and the greater as soon as possible.
Excellent. Please, if you have anything to present, feel free to share it with us.
Yes, I can't.
Oh, you can't share?
Yes, it says you can share content unless the host.
Oh, okay. Can the host help us with this here? Or if you can share it with me, with the host, if you can share it with the host, if you can send them a message to the host, maybe they can present it, or they can make you a presenter as well.
Okay. The host. Hi, so can you hear me?
Isabel, are you having trouble sharing your PowerPoint?
Yes. It says that I don't have like the authorization.
You should, if you go down to the bottom, you should be able to now at the bottom where it says share.
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. So you should see my screen now. Please confirm.
Yes, we do.
Okay. Here we go then. Well, if your country was in a difficult situation that makes you run away and turn you into a migrant in a foreign country, what would be your biggest fear? And if you were a Colombian living in a receiving area and suddenly you see your neighborhood full of foreigners, what would you worry? What worry you? Sorry. These were some of the questions that guided our investigation to discover very early that we had to build a strategy that tells a story of integration between Colombians and Venezuelans and not the migrant tale. Hi everyone, my name is Isabel González. I'm the Public Affairs Manager at Buho Media. And to begin, I hope you'll forgive me if I miss a few words. As Sofia Vergara said, you'll get surprised of how smart I am in Spanish. In this presentation, I'm going to tell you how we build data, how we build a database story of integration, the strategy to combat xenophobia against Venezuelan migrants in Colombia. And of course, how we use qualitative investigation to drive the analysis. Well, by 2020, Colombia had received 1.6 million Venezuelan migrants according to the country's migration authority. This makes of Colombia the country with the highest number of Venezuelan migrants since the exodus began. When the COVID-19 pandemic started, Colombians' disapproval of regularization of migrants and the opening of the Venezuelan border was about 80%, according to a national survey. At that moment, the border agency needed to set up its communication initiatives with a strategy based on data to reduce xenophobia, to align state initiatives, and to structure cooperation and procure international funding. So, in response, we designed an investigation based on qualitative data analysis to generate hypotheses that went from specific to general. So we could guide the team to build a narrative that fulfilled their needs. Then first, we reviewed previous investigations. The purpose was to enrich the discussion on the communication of migrations. Then we discovered, for example, that several common assumptions of strategic communications didn't apply to this phenomenon to specifically communicate about migration. To tackle strategic visions about Venezuelan migration in Colombia, we needed to collect information from allies and detractors of migration and from regional and national government officials. And we analyzed that interviews according to categories structured as elements of a story. Who was the villain, the princess, the hero? At the same time, to understand integrating elements between both Colombian and Venezuelan people, we needed to approach a representative sample of migrants in Colombia, returning Colombians, and people in settlement cities. When I say returning Colombians, I'm referring to the Colombians who migrated years ago to Venezuela when the situation was more difficult here in Colombia, and now they had to come back here because of the situation in Venezuela. And we also extracted verbatims from that interviews and used it as an input for the narrative. And finally, we went to general with real-time analysis of op-eds in national and regional media to identify the coincidence of the discourses about Venezuela migration with the communication efforts of the government and the influence of the strategy we designed. The analysis was based on mentions by tonality, by topics, and by stakeholder type. On the other side, the analysis of Twitter and Facebook made it possible to evaluate the most relevant initiatives of the strategy and the message from citizens about migrants during the implementation to know how to activate the participations. And also the spokespersons with the greatest impact to identify potential allies. Well, the thing is that to manage migration, the phenomenon must be understood in an integral way. Also, without an assertive communication, it is impossible to accomplish a proper application of public policy for both migrants and local community. And in that way, it is also impossible to avoid xenophobia. So by reviewing the bibliography, we could identify some of the edges of the communication of migrations. We reviewed learning from more than 20 previous studies and literature like case studies and demographics, public attitudes, values, and stand taking on migration, and assertive communication and public policy. What we learned. First, that migration communication must be value-based. The closer the message is to the values of the audience, the greater the probability of influencing the opinion about migration. Second, to appeal to citizens of moderate positions, because an assertive strategy is one that persuades the moderates, not the extremes. To segment the message and the spokespersons by audience, because addressing ordinary citizens is not the same as addressing the migrant community or public officials, or even another strategic stakeholders like actors or famous people. And we needed to address the communication to know what interests they have, what language and tone is appropriate for each one. Then we had to define milestones in communication, a strategy that sets goals step by step, not big goals. Then to promote articulated and coordinated communication between the different stakeholders, because all state entities and organizations linked to migration management must share and unify information. To create new narratives that promote the sociocultural and productive integrations of migrants, and also narratives that combat subtle biases, like one we found, for example, that Venezuelan women were promiscuous. Communication also involves listening, not just talking, because spaces for feedback and contact with the community are essential. The importance to link the phenomenon to individuals and to integrate and to generate feelings of empathy. That was the do's. So which were the don'ts? First, to avoid narratives based on stereotypes, extreme or commonplaces in the discussion. Second, not everything should be communicated by the government, because local stories must be narrated and understood from the local. Communication on a national scale can fall into generalization. More information doesn't always mean better reception. We shouldn't fall into saturation of information. Avoid characterizing migration as a threat, because migration transcends security. And this was particularly challenging in our case, because we found an already advanced narrative about Venezuelans associated with common crimes. And finally, that universalism and diversity is a commonplace and it isn't effective. And that one is very easy to fail. So, about the interviews, we made 25 in-depth interviews with strategic stakeholders, academy, international and NGOs allied organizations, opinion leaders, Venezuelan organization leaders in Colombia. And due to the profile of these interviewees, there was no hostile language toward migrants. But in this target, we found a greater recognition of the border agency, that was the institution that managed this phenomenon in Colombia, the manager, and the migration policies promoted by the Colombian national government. You'll see that that's a big difference with the bigger audience. Everyone knew of the entity, and some were even able to speak with knowledge about migrants management policies and measures. But the answers that represent the most nonconformity for the interviewees was in the role played by the national government. For example, the disarticulation of the president's discourse with the efforts of the border agency, the challenge in making local governments work under the same principles, or the institutional weakening due to prevailing ideologies in the government. One of the main findings was that the topics that connect naturally with Venezuelan migration were those related with the family and the effect that those stories has on the migrants, and the emotions and motivations of the interviewees in the real situations. In the chart, we can see in Spanish, sorry, that the stories they most remember were about childs, that's what says here, childhood or niñez, about women, or about Venezuelans stories of self-improvement. As I said before, one of the biggest insights were that perceptions about the management of the national government were divided between the negative and the positive. Although they always agreed that it was insufficient, we can see in the word cloud that the main words they used were generous, insufficient, uncoordinated, and supportive, almost at the same level. And we also found a big difference between the perception of the first migrants and the recent ones. And that was based on the money and the education level that they have. At that moment, we started to observe that there was an awareness of the division between them and us, being them, the Venezuelan, and us, the Colombians, where the good is more relating to the beginning of the phenomenon, because at the beginning, the phenomenon richest Venezuelans came to the country. And the bad is more latent today or at that day, because there was a migration more massive and poorest, to say the truth. When we asked about the challenges the government faced, integration was identified as the main one. Sorry, because the letter is very small, I know, but there says integration here. Integration was the first preoccupation or of this audience. Interviewers said it must be a priority in the message to be communication. And the regularization must be the government priority, because at that time, Colombia doesn't even have a way to regularize the migrants. So going to a more general audience, we made 191 interviews via WhatsApp with Colombian citizens, Venezuelan migrants in Colombia, and Colombians who returned. As you can see on the map, we focused on the biggest cities and the cities near to the border that have greater reception of migrants, like Maicao, Barranquilla, Cúcuta, Bucaramanga, and of course, Bogota. And we tried to reach people from all socioeconomical levels and ages. Unlike what was found with strategic stakeholders, the previous interviews, in this audience, the result was much more hostile. Through the investigation, we identified that for most of the participants, there wasn't a direct relation between the situation and any political figure, not even Maduro. For them, the situation was unfortunate and critical about being something that they relate to the Venezuelan government or any ideology, for example. We also found that for the participants who made any mention of the Colombian government, the role that it had played in managing the situation wasn't good. On the contrary, they questioned the large amount of aid that government had given to the migrants. And that was our first alert to notice that the main problem with the migration was the scarcity of resources. We confirmed that the stereotypes were generalized with a greater tendency to relate them to issues of insecurity, followed by work. And on the chart, we can see that people said that Venezuelans still take jobs from Colombians, that women prostitute themselves, or that they want everything for free. However, we found a way out of these stereotypes through they are not all, or we all pay for one. But the truth was that those expressions wasn't enough, because that continued to deepen the division between them and us. What we can see here is the confirmation of the bias about Venezuelan women that I mentioned before. People say Venezuelan women were homewrecker. In Spanish, is like quitamaridos. That is what it says here. That they were bad women, that they were crazy, or that they were ugly. This one was very curious, because we found that actually participants haven't had negative experience directly with Venezuelans, but it was through others' stories that the image of Venezuelan migrants was being created. And the street, the neighborhood, and the public transportation were the most common scenarios where this information was shared. We purposely ignored the news because it was like the obvious place to know about those stories, and we focus on the places that they they mention with shame, with a little shame, like i I heard like a gossip or in the bus. Those was the stories that we focused on. This one was the confirmation that for Colombians, it was important to guarantee the well-being of Colombians first, since they feel threatened by Venezuelan migrants in accessing state services. And let me put this in context because maybe I haven't gave you this information till now. Colombia is a poor and unequal country, beautiful but poor. For the majority of its population, about 72.7% of Colombians live below the poverty line, even the past year. So then is when you understand this big concern about competing for the state attention or for the public services, like in health, education, or the public services, like I said before. Finally, we found from the interviews that the similarity between Colombians and Venezuelans is that we are all human beings. And in that way, we are equal. We have the same needs and we have the similar motivations, such as family. They said things like we all deserve the same opportunities, we all want to get ahead. We also found that workplaces were the ideal setting to break down stereotypes, since there is where friendships are built, they said. So this was the first light, a little dim, but a light of where to focus communication for integration related to family, and that we are all human and we are the same without without seeing the flag. Then we went to test those discoveries in the media and social media. We analyzed 358 op-eds from 83 media and 217 opinion leaders, and a sample of 24,500 publications, almost 5,000 per month, of Venezuelan migration in the open Twitter and Facebook accounts in Colombia between June and October in 2020. Here we confirm that when the government publishes content about the measures it is taking for migrants' care, negative comments were generated to Venezuelans. We found that the president posted just 4 times during the whole measurement, but his messages generated a third part of the reactions of those days. Although only 4% of these reactions were comments, 95% of these were negative towards the government and towards the Venezuelan people. In addition, we found that publications directed to the Venezuelan populations to inform about aids or policies that were published from politicians' accounts increased the hostility. Although politicians didn't send negative message towards the Venezuelans, people respond by attacking administrations or the migrants themselves. The conversations turns to criticize the actions of these politicians and to talk about the political situation in Venezuela. The publications of the media, journalists, the government, and the politicians were the ones that generated the greatest number of reactions. 13% of interactions were for content posted by politicians. Although only 5% were user comments, all of them were negative towards migrants and national or local governments. We also confirmed the stigma associated with Venezuelans and their activities. Actions of microtrafficking and prostitution were two of the issues that generated the most criticism from the population towards the migration policies of the national government. On this subject, data made it possible to identify that there are key actors to demystify that there is a correlation between Venezuelan migration and the impact on citizen security in Colombia, such as the role of the academy as well as the response of the other citizens for whom the effects of crisis have no nationality. You'll see ahead that this was key to the impact of the strategy. From the content broadcast by the media accounts, both Facebook and Twitter, when criminal acts were narrated, we found that although the vast majority of the conversation was in hostile tones, there were users who judged, but they defended that there was no difference of nationality when committing crimes. And this one was essential to take that language they used to demystify the Venezuelans as criminals. So, what were the conclusions from the data? Measurement revealed key insights to the storytelling. First, that politicizing the discourse doesn't work. The research showed us that when opinion leaders use the resource in social media, they generate divisive ideological discussions, and that politicians limit their opinion to specific junctures, usually negative, generating hostility towards integration. Second, an idealistic story couldn't be told. Interviews showed that it wasn't evident that Colombians are very similar to Venezuelans, even though we really are. There were strong beliefs about migrants taking opportunities and resources away from Colombians, but there was recognition that we are all human and have the same needs. Not all of them was the positive side of that tale. 40% of the content analyzed in social media were negative and associated with migrants and associated migrants with an impact on security. But statements such as not all of them come to steal were the ones that stood out. Then we translated it as the family as an articulated element. We discovered that favorability increased in social media when showing initiatives aimed at children and young people. These stories also move interviewees, the strategic stakeholder ones. The border agency couldn't be an individual player. In social media, we didn't find evidence of the acknowledgement of any entity in charge of integration, but strategic stakeholders recognize the importance of strengthening the border agency to guide integration. And as we verified with the data, the allies were able to balance the hostility of the conversation. So we had at that moment we had all set for the narrative. We built a story of friendship inspired in Zootopia, the child movie, a friendship that arises from difference and overcomes stereotypes. We established the fear that an element called the fear there will not be enough for all to recognize such scarcity of shared opportunities, as well as being the first as an invitation to be empathetic. And it led us to panas y parceros. Panas y parceros means buddies in both Venezuelan and Colombian slang to generate closeness. And I also experienced it, which reminds of a situation in which we have all felt left out. For example, stigmatization because of drugs trafficking for Colombians. Our families were the integration element to communicate why it is worth the sacrifice. Therefore, with a team pursuing integration, we communicated that the border agency aimed at leading local governments, social organizations, and international cooperation, and having them assume integration as their own mission. We define a communication strategy in two stages. First, to generate empathy among the general population, the private sector, and the media, and also to position the border agency as an apolitical and articulating institution to dissolve the perception of competition for opportunities. And second, to teach about integration between Venezuelans and Colombians through our families and raise its benefit for the country's long-term economic and social development. We defined for the stage one a tactic plan based on first, to communicate with independent channel, ensuring that the border agency leads the integration message through its own agenda. Second, to have communication actions focused on the regions with a greater hostility towards migrants. Third, to communicate each progress in working with organizations to reaffirm the role of teamwork. Fourth, to train social leaders who belong to base projects of organizations in places with care programs for migrants. Fifth, a communication and migration training workshops for journalists and for police authorities to promote a correct use of language in the media and avoid xenophobic expressions. Six, to tell stories of similar things that have happened to us to create that first empathy of putting ourselves in the other's place through our own and allied channels. To communicate integration through management and public offer on issues that further intensify the tension like health, work, and safety. To support workplaces with a greater presence of Venezuelans and use their stories as cases to show and combat feelings of competitions. To show Colombians the benefit of integration in a language that is easy for people to understand. And finally, to create attractive events for international public opinion that involve actors such as embassies and philanthropists. Finally, some results. Thanks to aligned tactics guided by Buho and implemented by the World Bank, the Border Agency, and various organizations, the conversation began to take place through other actors. Con la camiseta del otro, which translate with the other shirt, was, for example, a campaign to take advantage of a football match between Venezuelan and Colombian national team. As you know, football in Latin America is very important. We impacted the favorability significantly by integrating high-profile influencers in the country, as Mariana Pajon, who is an Olympic champion of BMX from Colombia. And as in the example, we made other similar efforts with the team pursuing integration, that was that element of the narrative, like the World Arepa Day, the World Migrant Day, or even for Christmas. That chart, this chart shows the change during Con la camiseta del otro of the sentiment in the media conversation. As a result, the conversation began not only to balance, as you can see here, but also managed to close with a favorable gap greater than the hostility that prevailed. As you can see, the hostility was very high at the beginning. The strategy helped the scope of the conversation go from being negatively predominant to highlighting the positive side of integration. This was a joint effort between Buho, the border agency, and the World Bank with its allies, with which, thanks to data analysis and during its application to the implemented strategy, we had hoped that an integration between Venezuelans and Colombia was indeed possible. And that's all. I tried to be very fast. I hope it has been inspiring for you to know the power of data and communication to transform realities. I also firmly believe in the power of stories too. And thank you for listening to me. And now the space will be open if you have any questions or comments.
Actually, thank you very much, Isabel, for a very informative presentation. We are going to take questions now, as Isabel said, and I am toying with the idea of being selfish and just starting with one of my own. So I wanted to ask you, what was the most challenging aspect of this project and campaign?
Well, I think the most challenging was the deep problem, because as I said, this wasn't like physical violence yet, but there was a lot of expressions with a lot of violence and stigma against Venezuelans. So the decisions we were making and the strategy impact people, you know. There wasn't a number, wasn't what it was people. So we needed to ensure that the data and the investigation was very precise, because any mistaken decision would impact the reality of those persons who were suffering in Colombia, not just the Venezuelans, but also the local communities who were feeling that they were competing for the resources. So the precision of the investigation had to be very, very high. I think that's the most challenging.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Let me check from the participants here. I don't see any questions. If there isn't any questions, we are going to go ahead and wrap this up. Well, this really was
Hey,
really
Della,
informative.
there is
Yeah.
one question in the Q&A.
Okay, because I just opened it. Okay. You know what? I don't see the Q&A now in front of me. Let me see. Again. Let me be like that. Oh, no. I don't see the Q&A. Is it in the chat? I don't see. It was in front of me. And
That's okay.
Now, no, this is the chat. Yeah. Can you just share it with me? I don't see it at all.
Sure.
So,
Isabel, the question is, what lessons did Buho learn to use in future initiatives regarding social issues?
Can you repeat, please, what issues?
Sure. What lessons did Buho learn to use in future initiatives regarding social issues?
Yes, I think one of the biggest lessons that we even apply now to another clients is that the teamwork is very relevant to make an impact in the agenda, where we are talking about those social issues that are very difficult to balance in the public opinion, because the data shows us that when another stakeholders like USAID or the I don't know how to say ONU in English. Well, United Nations or another stakeholders like that, the impact was much higher and more and less hostile than when the government says it, because in Colombia there's little trust. Colombians doesn't trust in our government. So one of the biggest lessons was that to give the voice to those teamwork of international and NGOs organizations have greater impact.
Okay, any other questions? I see now the Q&A. It was just hidden. Well, if there isn't any questions, we are going to just wrap up our session. Thank you very much, Isabel. And I'm going to wrap up to say that today could not have ended better than with a story on how data analytics can underpin effective storytelling that can support a humanitarian agenda, demonstrating the versatility of data analytics that cuts horizontally across all areas of human endeavors. With our congratulations and our gratitude to Isabel for having championed such a project and having presented us with a superb real-life case study, I thank you all for participating today for our session and for the whole summit. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.